I'm going to begin learning about the battles of the Revolutionary War using the book, The Biggest Battles of the Revolutionary War. I will begin by reading from the Battles of Lexington and Concord, and then I'm going to go through and show you how I take notes on a tree map on key ideas from the reading. Battles of Lexington and Concord, April 18th through 19th, 1775. On the morning of April 18th, 1775, the people of Boston, Massachusetts, saw a sea of red. More than 800 British soldiers, also known as redcoats, lined up outside the town. They marched towards the town of Lexington and Concord. The plan was to arrest leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock in Lexington. Then they would collect Patriot weapons and gunpowder in nearby Concord. However, the soldiers' march was not a secret. When the British arrived in Lexington, about 70 colonial soldiers stood waiting. British Major John Pitcairn ordered the Patriots to move out of the way. Moments later, a musket shot was fired. The British assumed a colonist was the shooter and fired back. When the smoke cleared, 18 colonists were wounded or dead. One thing that helps me is if I take a screenshot of the reading and use my highlighter and highlight key ideas. So notice I'm highlighting dates, I'm highlighting places. I noticed it said 800 British soldiers, so that was important. And then I'm kind of highlighting a couple of key things that they did. They marched towards the town of Lexington and Concord. Their plan is to arrest Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock. They're collecting Patriot weapons. I highlighted the British Major's name and a couple of other things. This will help me when I'm taking my notes on a tree map. Discovering that Adams and Hancock had escaped, the soldiers moved on to Concord. There they destroyed weapons and gunpowder, creating a huge fire. Patriot Minutemen thought Concord was on fire and moved to defend the town. Surprised, the British retreated. After the reading, I'm going to go back and highlight some key ideas that I want to put in my notes so I don't forget. Adams and Hancock had escaped. That's important. The British destroyed weapons. That's important. And the Patriot Minutemen defended the town, which then led to the British retreating. That's important too. Colonists chased the British 20 miles back to Boston. Militiamen hid in the forest, shooting at the British soldiers' bright red coats as they marched by. Colonists from around Lexington and Concord joined in the battle. Musket smoke filled the air. By the end of the day, the redcoats were trapped in Boston. British leaders were worried. Before the battle, they never imagined the colonists would fight back. Now they knew the colonists were ready to fight with their lives. So the key ideas I would want to highlight is that the colonists chased the British 20 miles. So that means that the British retreated back to Boston and that they were eventually trapped in Boston. So I guess this would be considered a win for the British because the colonists were ready to fight with their lives. Now that I read the article and I went back and I highlighted key ideas to help me remember, so I kind of read the article twice, I'm going to go ahead and start my tree map. Notice that I have the title of the battle on the top. My first section is going to be called Who, like who is involved in this battle. When and where did it take place? That's important. What happened during the battle is going to be very important, and that's going to fill most of my space for my notes. And then finally, what is the result of the battle? So I'm going to be going back to the article, and I'm going to be getting all the ideas of the things I highlighted. I highlighted the date, April 18th and 19th, 1775. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write down some of the key places like Boston and Lexington and Concord. I'm even going to put a 1 and a 2 because first they went to Lexington and then they went to Concord. I'm going to write down who was involved. There were 800 British redcoats. I'm going to write down the name of the British captain who was in charge of the battle. And then again, I'm going to fill most of my space with what happened. So what happened during the battle? Well, what happened was that the British planned to arrest Adams and Hancock and to capture the Patriot weapons. That's very important. That's what they planned to do. First, they marched into Lexington. We did learn that Adams and Hancock found out that they were coming, so they were able to escape. That's important, so they didn't capture them. However, the British decided to keep moving forward, and then they moved on to Concord in Massachusetts. And they did wind up destroying colonial weapons, and they even created a fire. However, the colonists didn't just stand back, they were fighting, and because they were able to see the redcoats, they chased them back to Boston. So that's important. As for the result of the battle, there's not too much information, but I am going to write down that the British retreated back to Boston. Whenever one side retreats, that usually means that they are not winning, and so they're going back. So it's clear that I should definitely be reading another resource to help me gather more information. So I'm going to turn to Capstone Interactive Books and the book that I downloaded called Battles of the Revolutionary War. If you go to contents, you will find all the different chapters. You're only going to be reading one chapter or listening to one chapter that goes with each battle. So you don't have to read the book from beginning to end, just focusing on the battles that we're researching.
What happened at Lexington and Concord? Patrick Henry's famous phrase, "Give me liberty or give me death," expressed how many colonists felt in the spring of 1775. British General Thomas Gage was under pressure from British leaders to act with force to keep Britain's control in the colonies. The Patriots had many spies in Boston. Rumors spread around Massachusetts that the British would soon march on Concord. Colonists began moving weapons and supplies out of the town. Keys to victory. In April 1775, the Continental Congress had not yet approved the formation of a national army. Instead, each colony had its own militia, which was made up of citizen soldiers. Most were volunteers who normally worked in other trades and jobs. Minutemen volunteered or were picked from the militias. They were called Minutemen because they were expected to be ready to march or fight with only a minute's notice. The British are coming. On the evening of April 18, 1775, a group of 800 British troops headed north toward Concord. Their plan was to quickly grab weapons stored there. They also hoped to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock along the way. British spies knew that Adams and Hancock could be found in Lexington. Paul Revere and William Dawes learned of this plan. They left Boston on horseback to warn colonists that the British were coming. It is not known for certain which side fired the first shot at Lexington. That shot became known as the shot heard round the world. The Patriots are warned. Revere and Dawes arrived in Lexington first with their warning. Adams and Hancock were able to escape, and the militiamen were called to fight. The British troops marched 24 kilometers, 15 miles, from Boston to Lexington. When they arrived, about 70 militiamen stood ready to defend the town. At the head of the British troops, Major John Pitcairn ordered the militiamen to throw down their weapons. This map shows some of the major battle sites of the Revolutionary War. Lexington and Concord are in the upper right-hand corner of the map. Key: battle site. Shot heard round the world. On the colonist side, Captain John Parker commanded 70 militiamen against 800 British troops. Seeing that they were greatly outnumbered, Parker ordered his men to disperse, move apart. Some refused, but many followed his orders. As they walked away, a shot rang out. A series of shots then followed from the British. 8 militiamen were killed and 9 were wounded. Order was restored, and the British continued their march west to Concord. When the British troops arrived in Concord, they searched the town. However, almost all weapons and ammunition had already been removed by the colonists. British returned to Boston. Meanwhile, militiamen from the surrounding area arrived. They met at the North Bridge leading into Concord. A small group of British soldiers was guarding the bridge. The militiamen outnumbered them and decided to attack. The British retreated back into town. From there, they decided to return to Boston. On the way back to Boston, the British received reinforcements. The British made easy targets, marching down the road in their red coats. The colonial militiamen hid behind trees and anything else they could find along the route the British took, firing on them as they retreated to Boston. British troops marched about 24 kilometers, 15 miles, from Boston to Lexington, and then another 10 kilometers, 6 miles, to Concord. By the time they reached Charlestown, north of Boston, the British had 73 killed, 174 wounded, and 26 missing. Patriot losses were 49 dead, 39 wounded, and 4 missing. Volunteer militiamen had kept over 1,500 professional British soldiers on the run. The battles of the Revolutionary War had begun. Keys to victory. The colonial militias had a lot of support from the population in New England. Spies there made sure militiamen knew when the British were on the move. That's why militiamen were able to attack the British while they retreated to Boston after Lexington and Concord.
Now that I finished the second reading, I'm going to be adding some additional information that I learned. I can add that the event happened in the evening of April 18th. I also never made note that Paul Revere and William Dawes were the ones responsible for warning the colonists that the British were coming. That's important. And I'm going to add that to the what happened, because Adams and Hancock escaped because Paul Revere warned the colonists that the British were coming. That's important. So I'm going to jot it down in a different color so that I know where I got the information from. I added a detail that it was a 15-mile march to Lexington for the British. I also added the name of the captain for the colonial side, whose name was Captain John Parker. I didn't have that from the first reading. So as you can see, it's important to read more than one resource so that you can keep adding information that is important to understanding the event. I added that there were 7 militiamen compared to the 800 British Redcoats. That's an important detail. And this resource gave me a lot of information about the results of the battle. It told me how many died, how many were wounded, and how many were missing. So I can really see, that there were 73 dead on the British side and 49 dead on the Patriot side. You can tell that it was a win for the colonists. Finally, I'm going to add a couple of key notes in the frame of my notes. I'm going to write down in red on the left side the what. It's the first battle, and I know it's the American Revolution. And in green on the right side, I'm going to write my 2 sources, the Capstone book and the Biggest Battles book, so that I know where I got my information. I think I'm done.